Hi, everyone. We're excited to have you join Registrar Corp for Unpacking U.S. FDA Food Labeling and Ingredient Regulation, what companies must know before exporting. We'll be discussing the ingredient and labeling rules and regulations for food products distributed in the United States. I'm proud to introduce Anna Benevente, Registrar Corp's Director of Product Labeling and Ingredient Review, who will be leading this webinar. She holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in biology from the College of William and Mary and has over 15 years of experience in analytical research. Since joining Registrar Corp in 2009, her team has reviewed over 13,000 products for FDA compliance. Throughout this webinar, feel free to write any questions in the Q&A box found in the top bar as we save time at the end to answer them. Without any further ado, Anna, take it away.
Good morning, and thank you for that kind introduction. I'm very excited to be able to present to you all today. These are the topics that we will be covering in our webinar. First, we will discuss what every food company must know before they start exporting food products to the U.S., FDA's oversight of foods, and two important questions that every company must ask related to their ingredients and their labels. In our next section, we'll describe how a company determines if their product's ingredients are okay. We'll go over how FDA regulates food ingredients and designates them as safe, and common mistakes made by food companies before they ship. We'll follow up with the labeling requirements that all food labels must meet. All the general mandatory labeling elements will be described, and we'll go over additional labeling considerations, such as nutrient and organic claims. Finally, we'll present to you Registrar Corp's solutions to help your company achieve compliance and ensure trouble-free exportation to the U.S. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Registrar Corp, we are a firm that specializes in FDA regulatory compliance with over 30,000 clients across 175 countries. We have 20 offices worldwide to assist our clients in their time zones and languages. We are very proud to have a high level of satisfaction from our customers and over 20 years of experience to companies in the food, supplement, cosmetic, drug, and device industries. Our label review team is of experienced professionals, hold multiple advanced degrees in the areas of biology, chemistry, quality management, botany, human nutrition, pharmaceutical sciences, and cosmetic sciences. We have reviewed over 13,000 products for compliance and take enormous pride in ensuring that our clients meet FDA's requirements for food formulation and labeling. As most people know, the U.S. food market is incredibly large, with revenues of almost $1 trillion projected in 2024. For many companies, exportation to the U.S. is a significant way to increase the value and financial growth of their businesses. Companies that successfully export to the U.S. can often count upon a consistent revenue stream in a market that continues to expand. However, many pitfalls can occur between a company and its financial windfall in the U.S. market. FDA regulations are strict, so a company must ask itself before it exports, what do I need to know? In the next section of this webinar, we'll describe how a company should ensure that its food products are appropriate for the U.S. market. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, has jurisdiction over most foods in the U.S. market. Under their authority, they issue strict regulations regarding what ingredients may be used in food products. They also have complicated regulations that govern the labeling of food products. These regulations specify what must appear on the label, as well as rules regarding claims being made about the products. Many companies make the critical mistake of thinking that the FDA regulations only apply to domestic U.S. producers, but this is not the case. Imported foods must also comply with these regulations upon entry. FDA inspects foods in port and will not release products that have improper ingredients or labeling. even if the importer intends to change the label after it arrives. Products must be compliant when they arrive at the port of entry. Smart companies will ask themselves two important questions before shipping their food product to the U.S. 1, are my ingredients permitted? 2, is the labeling correct? These two issues are extremely common causes of problems for imported foods in U.S. ports. A company may ask itself why this matters. Many companies ship for years without any issues. However, it is important to note that FDA does conduct inspections in port, particularly on goods from new shippers. If a non-compliant product is found, it is usually detained. Rarely will FDA let non-compliant goods in with only a warning. If a product has an illegal ingredient, it will usually be refused entry since there is no way to remove it from the product. Product with labeling errors can be relabeled if the importer petitions FDA successfully. However, this process is expensive and time-consuming, as FDA must approve the petition and then inspect the goods after relabeling. This process can take months to resolve and can easily damage your business relationships. Also, a package with stickers covering the non-compliant information is not very attractive to a consumer and could negatively impact sales. Violations can result in a company being placed on import alert. All future shipments will be detained without any inspection by FDA at all. This can cripple your business in the U.S. The consequences of non-compliance can be extremely severe. A few years ago, we assisted a large chocolate manufacturer who had 3 shipments of their chocolate stopped in early December. They were detained based on violations of the general labeling requirements that we're going to discuss today. They were destined for fancy department stores to be sold for the Christmas season. We submitted petitions to request permission to relabel, but FDA did not respond for 2 months. It's important to understand that when you are detained, you are on their time clock, and FDA moves very slowly. Once approved, it took a few weeks to get stickers on all the packages, and then FDA took a few weeks to come out and confirm that they were now in compliance. They were released, but not until almost 4 months after they were initially detained. The company missed the holiday shopping season and Valentine's Day as well, and it was a blow to their business. Proper labels would have prevented this fiasco. We had a similar situation with the seasoning product that was labeled for the Chinese market and brought to the U.S. by an importer interested in selling it here. FDA detained it for labeling violations, including the lack of a nutrition facts chart. FDA refused to accept nutrient values from the manufacturer and insisted that the products be tested by a U.S.-based nutrition laboratory. They gave the importer a very short timeline to respond. So the importer was forced to pay for an expedited analysis by a U.S. lab before we could even create the new label. The importer successfully relabeled the product, but FDA took a long time to come inspect the shipment. So the entire process took about 3 months. The takeaway here is that detentions are expensive, time-consuming, and a huge problem for a supply chain. They must be avoided at all costs. So how does one go about figuring out whether the products are okay or might be in danger of being detained? You have 2 basic steps to eliminate some of this risk. 1, is my formulation okay? Conduct a check of your ingredients to make sure that they are permitted in the U.S. Then select only those products with formulations that will be acceptable to FDA. 2, is my labeling okay? For these selected products, review the labeling and revise as necessary before shipping. Remember, relabeling in port is expensive and time-consuming, if FDA even allows you to do it. Prevent the need for relabeling by making sure it's correct before you export. Many companies are uncertain as how to determine if their ingredients are acceptable for the U.S. market. In this section of the webinar, we'll explain how FDA regulates ingredients and where they publish their regulations. FDA has 3 classifications for ingredients: food additives, substances that are generally recognized as safe, also called GRAS, and color additives. By law, all substances added to food must be approved by FDA through the Food Additive Petition process, unless they are generally recognized as safe. GRAS substances are recognized as safe for their intended use by qualified experts, either through scientific procedures or through a history of use in food. Color additives, even those from natural sources, must all be approved by FDA. They are never considered GRAS. In order to figure out if your ingredients fall into one of these categories, you will need to research some specific sources. The U.S. Code of Federal Regulations includes all of the food additives and color additives that have been approved by FDA. It also includes regulations where FDA has affirmed certain substances are GRAS. It is important to pay close attention to the regulations, as they will tell you exactly what products and intended uses are covered. For example, some are permitted generally in food, but others may be limited to only particular types of food or for certain specific uses. GRAS status is not limited to these FDA GRAS affirmations. GRAS status is based upon the opinion of the scientific community as a whole. So companies are permitted to self-affirm an ingredient is GRAS using data that is public or privately held. If a company chooses to self-affirm an ingredient as GRAS, then they should make sure that they have the data available in the event that FDA requests proof of their ingredient's status. FDA has a process by which a company may submit what is called a GRAS notice to inform the FDA that they have determined an ingredient is GRAS. FDA may then respond whether they have any questions or concerns regarding the company's data. These are all filed in what's called the GRAS Notice Inventory. Unfortunately, many companies don't perform any sort of compliance check on their products prior to shipping and find out the hard way that their ingredients are not permitted in the U.S. market. One of the most common mistakes are illegal colors, because FDA must approve every color additive, even those from safe natural sources. Colors common in other markets, such as Ponceau 4R and Carmoisine, are not permitted in the U.S. Other common color additive issues concern colors that are subject to a batch certification requirement from FDA. For these colors, a sample from the actual batch must be sent to FDA for them to test it. For example, Allura Red must be certified by FDA as FD&C Red number 40. Brilliant Blue is another example. It must be certified as FD&C Blue number 1. Other ingredients that can cause issues are artificial sweeteners, such as cyclamates and dulcin, which are not approved by FDA. Recently, FDA issued a final order that essentially bans partially hydrogenated oils due to their trans fat content. Products from other markets where they are permitted should not be sent to the U.S. Stevia has purity specifications that must be met. FDA has an import alert for it, along with other ingredients such as tamarind, where FDA will stop these products and force the importer to prove that they meet FDA's requirements before entering the U.S. market. And finally, CBD. CBD is confusing because individual states in the U.S. permit it, but at the federal level, it is not permitted by FDA to be added to food. Once a company has determined that their products are formulated correctly for the U.S. market, it is still incredibly important that the labeling be reviewed to ensure that it is compliant. The labeling is the first thing an FDA compliance officer will see when your product enters port. In this section of the webinar, we'll discuss the mandatory labeling requirements for food products. There are certain statements that must always appear on food labeling, as shown here, that we will discuss in depth in the next few slides. First and foremost is a statement of identity, what the product actually is. FDA requires that it be the name specified by law, the common or usual name used in the marketplace, but not a brand name, or a fanciful name understood by the general public. So for example, most of us are probably familiar with the brand Oreo and understand what that is, but that is not a statement of identity. Oreo labels include a statement of identity, chocolate sandwich cookies, to meet this requirement. Some products are subject to what is called a standard of identity. This is when FDA dictates what the characteristics are for a product identified by a particular name. This can include permitted ingredients and certain manufacturing methods that must be conducted. Examples include ice cream, jam, margarine, and peanut butter. There are about 280 standards of identity, so you will want to determine if your product is subject to one. The statement of identity is also subject to special requirements based on flavor declarations, if there are juice ingredients, and when the product is in a specific form, and more. The next mandatory statement we'll discuss is the net quantity of contents. You must declare the actual quantity of product in the container. Solid and viscous products are declared by weight and must include the term or an abbreviation for net weight. Liquid products are to be declared in terms of volume. You must include both metric and imperial terms of measurement. This is another common cause for detention, even something this simple. For example, if a product that declares its weight in grams but does not include the amount in ounces, this can cause a product to be stopped in port. The next and usually most difficult part of mandatory food labeling is the nutrition facts label. FDA has very specific requirements for format, content, and type sizes. Unlike some markets where nutrition labeling is simply based on 100 grams or 100 milliliter amounts, for FDA nutrition charts, a serving size must be declared based on a reference amount for that exact food established by FDA. There are additional dual column chart requirements for products and packages that might be consumed in a single sitting. There are also different formats for infant and toddler foods and when there's more than one product in a package. We've pulled together some examples from other countries to illustrate how different the FDA chart is. Here you can see the US FDA chart compared to charts from the UK, Australia, and Mexico. Here you can see the US FDA chart compared to charts from Canada, Argentina, and China. Again, very different. So it is obvious to FDA inspectors when a product comes in with a label that's not in compliance with this requirement. Any inspector that sees this mistake is bound to detain the product and refuse it unless the importer petitions for permission to relabel it. FDA has multiple chart formats that are permitted on food labeling subject to certain conditions. To the left, we see the simplified format, which is permitted on certain products that don't have a lot of nutrient value. On the upper right side of the panel and at the bottom of the panel, we see two tabular charts that are permitted on certain sized packaging. The first one is permitted when a label panel is less than 3 inches tall. The other is permitted on certain smaller packages that can't fit the standard chart. And in the middle is the linear format, permitted only on very small packaging. If you choose to use any of these nutrition facts panels, you must make sure that your package and product qualify. FDA's newest regulations for nutrition labeling include mandatory dual column formats for containers that are between 200 and 300% of an FDA reference amount for that food, and also in cases where the product is in a unit, like a muffin, that is between 200 and 300% of the reference amount. The chart must show the nutrient values for the serving size, but also have a column for the entire container or unit. This ensures that the consumer is aware of the nutrient values should they eat the entire package or the entire unit. Most foods, except for single ingredient foods, must declare all of their ingredients on the package. Most of these ingredients must be declared by their common or usual name. No E or INS numbers are permitted. Most have to be declared individually and not grouped together in parentheses. They must be in descending order by weight. There are some exceptions to the rules for certain ingredients, such as flavors, colors, and some spices, but by and large, all will be declared by their actual name. Allergens are a very important part of food labeling, not just from a labeling aspect, but also because if they cause a problem, if undeclared, you can be subject to a recall requirement. Accurate allergen declarations are a significant safety and labeling issue. FDA has 9 mandatory food allergens that require disclosure: milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, but not molluscan, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, but not gluten, soybeans, and sesame. You may declare them in parentheses next to the ingredient in the list, or declare all of them in a contained statement adjacent to the list. Every food product label needs to declare either the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. You may choose any of these 3 options to meet this requirement. Note that it must include the actual corporate name and full address, although you may omit the street address if it is found in a local directory. FDA must have a way to contact a responsible party if they discover a problem with the product. While not an FDA requirement, it is important to know that U.S. Customs and Border Protection has a labeling requirement for the country of origin. This is the country where the last substantial transformation took place, as defined by Customs, and it must appear on all retail food labels. You may only use abbreviations for countries that are deemed acceptable by Customs. For example, PRC is not an acceptable abbreviation for China, as a U.S. consumer may not be familiar with it and would not realize that it stands for People's Republic of China. Recently, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, issued new rules regarding the disclosure of bioengineered ingredients. USDA maintains a list of foods that are generally considered to be genetically modified. If your food product has an ingredient on that list, or if you know of any ingredient in your food, even ones not on the list, that is the product of bioengineering, then you must disclose it on the label. USDA gives several options, including a symbol. And even though this rule was issued by USDA, it impacts FDA-regulated product labeling as well. In addition to regulations regarding the mandatory statements that must appear, FDA has a maze of regulations related to other labeling issues, such as claims. FDA dictates when such claims can be made. For example, nutrient content claims refer to the levels of a nutrient in the food, such as high in fiber, low fat, and healthy. FDA sets nutrient levels that must be met in order for a label to bear the claim. Health claims refer to a risk reduction in disease that may occur during the consumption of the food. A health claim must be pre-approved by FDA, and this is the only way that a disease can be referenced on a food label. Structure function claims reference effects to the structure or function of the body due to consumption of the food. These claims are not pre-approved by FDA, but must be truthful and based on the nutritive value of the food. Another common labeling element are additional languages beyond English. Note that your labels must have all mandatory statements in English. If any other language is present, then all mandatory statements must appear in that language too. Brand names and mottos may be exempt from this requirement, though, as they do not convey material information about the product. The idea is that if a non-English speaker looks at your label and recognizes a portion of the text, FDA wants them to have access to all of the mandatory information that's required under the food labeling regulations. Due to a strong marketing advantage and consumer desire for clean labels, organic foods are now a significant part of the U.S. market. In order to make this claim, your food will need to be certified by an agent that is accredited by the USDA. The claim itself will be based upon the percentage of organic ingredients in the product, and the agent's information must appear on the label. USDA does have a few memoranda in understanding with certain markets like the EU, where there are some exceptions to this rule, but by and large, this is going to be the case for your product. Companies need to be vigilant in ensuring that their labels meet FDA's requirements. Here are 5 common mistakes, many of which I found on a detention notice this morning for a company that did not do a compliance check before shipping. This is a company that has 8 different candy products from India sitting in port, many of these with these exact labeling violations. It's very common for other markets to permit declaring ingredients by E or INS numbers, but that is not the case here. We often see companies using nutrition charts that are permitted on small packages, not understanding the limitations of their use. Because the majority of the world relies on the metric system, many labels arrive to the U.S. without the mandatory declaration in ounces or fluid ounces. What seems like a pretty minor issue can actually cause a product to be detained. It's very common for labels to bear claims such as high in vitamin A, but the product does not have enough to qualify. This results in misbranding charges. And last but not least, if there are any non-English statements on your label, you will probably need to reproduce all of the mandatory statements in that language or opt for an English-only label when you ship to the US. We hope that the information that we've presented gives you a good overview of how to check your product's formulation and labeling to determine if it will meet FDA requirements. If you still find that the rules and regulations are too confusing or want an expert to look over your products before you ship, Registrar Corp is here to help. Registrar Corp has many solutions to help you make sure that your labels meet FDA's requirements. We offer varying levels of assistance with our full label review, label check report, nutrition facts, and ingredient review services. We also offer consulting by the hour if you have any other questions or concerns that require an experienced regulatory affairs professional. As I mentioned before, it's critical to make sure that your formulation consists only of ingredients that are permitted in the U.S. market, as well as making sure that the labeling is correct. Our full label review service gives you one-on-one assistance with an experienced regulatory specialist who will do a complete evaluation of your ingredients and labeling. We conduct a thorough analysis of the label for each of the mandatory statements that we've discussed today and make recommendations for changes to bring your label and product into compliance. We issue a report that includes all of our recommendations, and we will provide you with a print-ready graphic that is in compliance with FDA's labeling requirements. The service also includes a 30-day period where you can ask questions and get an extra round of graphic changes to the revised label at no additional charge. If you're feeling pretty confident that your product label is compliant, but still want the reassurance of a group of experienced regulatory specialists looking it over, Registrar Corp offers a label check report option. Our team will look over the 10 mandatory elements that should appear on your conventional food label and give you guidance regarding any potential issues that we find, and instructions on what changes you should make prior to exporting it to the US. A report will summarize the changes, and you will receive 30 minutes of consultation after delivery to go over our findings. If you're feeling pretty confident about your labeling, but do want some help with that complicated nutrition facts label, Registrar Corp offers a service that will give you one-on-one assistance from a regulatory specialist. This specialist will help you figure out the proper reference amount and the serving size for your product, as well as the proper modified label format that may be permitted for your product and package. We will provide you with a print-ready graphic that you can use on your label and a report that details each recommendation and regulation used to develop your nutrition facts label. For companies that are still in the process of developing their formulations or that are concerned that their ingredients may not be approved in the U.S., Registrar Corp's Ingredients Review Service can provide peace of mind prior to export. We will review all of the ingredients in your products to verify that the ingredients are either affirmed as safe, approved as food additives, or approved as color additives by FDA. Save yourself the headache of a refused shipment by ensuring that your ingredients are permitted before you ship to the United States. Are you unsure whether or not your product labels are compliant for the U.S. market? We're here to help. You may send your product labels to us for a free label assessment. We'll check to see if they appear to have any compliance issues related to the mandatory elements we've discussed today. Our team of regulatory advisors will provide you with our comments and can give you information regarding our services in case you need to change your labels before you ship them to the U.S. We have many other ways that we can help you as you export your foods to the U.S. Registrar Corp offers a full range of compliance services, all of which are fixed fee. We can assist you with many FDA requirements, such as food facility registration and U.S. agent, prior notice, labeling, low acid and canned food requirements, food safety plans and services that are necessary to meet the requirements of the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. We can also help you if your products are being detained or on an import alert. If you get detained, don't give up right away. Send us the FDA's notice of detention, called a notice of action, for a free assessment, and we can see if and how you may be able to get them released. We look forward to assisting you with successful exportation of your products to the U.S. market. And with that, we'll open our webinar up for any questions that you may have. I've seen some hands raised, and so I would ask you, if you have questions, to please put them in the Q&A box at the top of your screen. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and try and address all of your questions that I can in our time frame. Let's see, first question that I see is, kindly confirm if this presentation will be shared with the participants. Yes, you'll be receiving a follow-up email with, I believe, either a link into the slides or the actual recording itself. Let's see, next question, do you help as well to obtain the FDA not only on the labeling? I'm not entirely sure what it's referring to, but I will tell you that we have 20 years of experience in helping companies with FDA requirements. So even if we don't have services to assist you with a particular requirement, we can help you understand what those might be and perhaps point you in the right direction. Next question, made in Europe, is that an acceptable country of origin? Excellent question and a common issue because unfortunately it is not. You may not put made in Europe or made in the EU. You will need to specify the exact country in which the product was manufactured. Next question, does the public have access to the database of the FDA's detained products and the reasons for the detention? FDA does publish the actual import refusals that are done. So active detentions can only be accessed if you have an entry number that's issued by customs and enter what's called the ITAX system. However, if a product gets actually refused entry, then they will publish that, and you can find it pretty easily on the FDA's webpage. The import alerts that I mentioned before, those are also on FDA's webpage. So if you just do a search for them, you can find them, and you can also see what companies are named on them as well. And again, if your company is on an import alert, don't give up shipping to the US. It's a pretty long and lengthy process to get off of an import alert. However, we have services that can help you do this. And we can make sure that once you get off that you have, smooth sailing to the US from there on out. Okay, so the next question, is a nutritional statement on the label compulsory for all food ingredients? For example, bulk vanilla essence sold only business to business. So there are some exemptions from the nutrition facts requirements. For example, bulk being sent just to another business. So for example, a manufacturer for further processing. Also, if you're sending a product to food service or restaurants, that may also be exempted from the nutrition facts panel requirement. Also, certain products like coffee and tea that don't have any nutritional value at all, at least that would go in a nutrition facts panel, those may be exempt, but only if no other nutritional information or claims are present on the labeling. Next question, how can I know if an ingredient is a dietary ingredient or a food ingredient? Is there any FDA list about food and dietary ingredients? So I think you've just given me an idea for another webinar, the difference between conventional foods and dietary supplements. So the way that FDA divides them up, you have conventional foods and dietary supplements. Dietary supplements are the ones that would have what FDA deems dietary ingredients. And FDA has some publications about ones that they've deemed inappropriate. In essence, the manufacturer is the one that decides what the dietary ingredients are. And then that ingredient will be subject to other requirements from FDA. However, dietary ingredients are not subject to the food additive and GRAS regulations that we described today. Okay. The next question, what documents are required to be sent with every delivery of exported food products? So unfortunately, this is a very wide and broad question and hard to answer without knowing exactly what the product is. For example, certain products with animal sourced ingredients, even if they're regulated by FDA, may require additional documentation that USDA may ask for. The best thing to do, besides contacting us for how we can help with things like prior notice and food facility registration, is actually to talk to a U.S. customs broker. Your importer, if you're an exporter, your importer will hire a customs broker to assist with the shipment. That customs broker has access to FDA's and customs systems to determine what sort of documentation will be requested from the exporter when it's shipped. Okay, so the next question, is there a mandatory certified quality and food safety system to be implemented at the manufacturer or exporter site? Would FDA order an unexpected or announced audit on the manufacturer's premises? Okay, so as far as food safety goes, and this question also involves the food facility registration that is mandatory. So for anybody who's manufacturing a product for the US food market, you will have to register with FDA. That registration grants, in essence, when you register, you grant FDA permission to come inspect your facility. For the US facilities, they just show up unannounced. For a foreign company, though, they will usually send a notice of inspection because of the travel time and wanting to make sure that the appropriate people are there when they arrive. So you will have an advance notice if you are not in the US. One of the things that they will probably check for is whether or not you are following our requirements for food safety. So generally this means a HARP-C plan, or if you're doing seafood and juice and a few other types of products, a HACCP plan. If anybody here is a manufacturer and you are interested, please do contact us. We have a lot of information both on our website and with our food safety group, specialists who are trained in all of FDA's requirements for food safety. So please do reach out to us. Okay, the next question is, what are the microbiological parameters to be determined to food products prior to exporting to the U.S.? Are there any limits for these parameters, such as listeria, salmonella, and so forth? So FDA, in some cases, has a zero tolerance policy for certain contaminants. Others, they have published certain defect action levels, as they call them, for certain food products with certain issues in adulteration, like insect fragments, rodent hair, and that sort of thing. So again, our food safety team is very well versed in all these issues if you need assistance with that. Okay. Okay, the next question, how strict is the border regarding net weight, and how do I prevent rejections or problems? So it all really kind of depends on whether or not you're inspected. FDA does not inspect every shipment that comes in, which is why many companies will ship for years and then all of a sudden be surprised with an inspection and a detention and not understand why all of a sudden FDA has pinpointed them. So it's important because of this to just make sure everything is correct before you ship. For something like the net weight, because US consumers are not really well versed in the metric system, even after all these years that they implemented it, they actually are pretty strict about it. So if the rest of your labeling is correct, you may still have to add a sticker or something like that that gives the amount in ounces and fluid ounces, as well as the amount on the metric system. So the best thing to do to prevent a rejection or a problem is really to just check your labels before you ship, try and get them in compliance so that you reduce the risk of a problem in port. Okay, let's see, we've got some other questions. Okay, next question. Is a coconut considered an allergen product? Does it come in the tree nuts category? Yes, coconut is considered an allergen, so you will want to treat it as such when you're developing your labeling. Okay, is there a required analysis of the water used in the production area or in production purposes in terms of radioactivity to be done prior to exporting? So all of those types of issues, good manufacturing practices, all of that falls under our food safety requirements. And again, it's necessary to follow either HARP-C or HACCP, depending on the type of product that you're producing. So again, if you have questions about that, then please do contact us. We have a highly experienced food safety team that can assist you. Okay. Next question, are flavors exempted from nutrition facts labeling? So flavors can be. It depends on whether or not they have any sort of nutritive value, such as, sodium, if there are excipients used that have sodium, or if there's any sort of caloric content, that sort of thing. In essence, if your nutrition facts panel would be all zeros, you may be exempt from unless claims are made. Like if you claim it's healthy or something like that, then you have to have the nutrition facts chart on your labeling. Okay, next question. According to FDA regulations, is there a mandatory position for the presentation of the information? Do they have to be the right of the PDP? Excellent question. Yes, FDA requires certain information, the statement of identity and the net quantity at a minimum, appear on the front of the package, which is called the principal display panel. Then the remainder of the mandatory information usually has to appear on the information panel, which is defined as the panel to the right. There are some exemptions, though. If you have small packages where not all of the information will fit, or if there are flaps or things like on a juice box or a box that, where there's unusable space to the right to print upon, then you may be able to shift it to the next available panel. Okay. Again, I see hands raised. Please do put your questions in the Q&A, and I would love to be able to answer any questions that everybody has. Next question, is a product for industrial ingredients need to declare nutrition information? And what is the mandatory labeling for industrial products? So by this, I presume you mean not meant for retail sale. So if a consumer is not going to see your label, you are generally exempt from nutrition labeling. In a lot of cases, the ingredients aren't finished products, so there's no reference amount that FDA would have. However, if a consumer might see your label, then you do want to make sure that all of the information is there. For products that are for manufacturing or industrial use, we still recommend that you include the rest of those mandatory statements on the label to be prudent. FDA does have a guidance against unlabeled foods coming into port. So they need to have some sort of identification and information on those. Otherwise, you can end up with a detention. One of the first detentions that I did was for bulk juice that was being sent to a winery. And they were just in these big vats with no labeling on them, and FDA detained it. And we had to come up with a quick label that had all of the mandatory information except for the nutrition chart in order to get that released. Okay, next question. When a protein claim is made on the label, does the PDCAAS need to be reflected in the DVs of protein only, or also in the quantity of the protein in grams? So generally speaking, if you're making a claim, it's likely that you'll need to be both. Certainly the percent daily value has to be based on that corrected protein score. Because this is such a complicated process and can be expensive, this is why the percent daily value for protein is not required for most foods. So that's why you don't see it actually listed on a lot of the nutrition facts panels that are out there. However, if you make a protein claim, such as high in protein, good source of protein, then you do have to have that percent daily value, and it will have to be based on that corrected score. Okay, let's see. Next question is about probiotics. Let's see. As a follow-up question to the conventional ingredient versus dietary ingredient, probiotics and prebiotics, there's no specific regulation surrounding these in conventional foods as opposed to dietary supplements. So is this subject to food additive and GRAS assessment when used in conventional foods? So yes, if you're adding probiotics, like for example, in a yogurt product or something like that, then it is subject to GRAS and food additive regulation. And so you want it to either appear in the Code of Federal Regulations as one of those, either affirmed as GRAS or food additive, or it will need to be GRAS, which certain probiotic strains most likely are. They've been used in food for a long, long time, but you'll want to make sure that you have data on hand to support that it's GRAS if you're adding it to a food product. Okay, let's see. Okay, next question is, for products such as jams, marmalades, our products are naturally gluten-free. Is this something that would still need documentation to prove? So this would all depend on whether or not FDA challenged that claim on your label in port. So you can make a gluten-free claim even on a product that's naturally gluten-free. Just from personal experience, I would say if none of the ingredients in the product could be considered a source of gluten, if it's pectin and sugar in the fruits, odds are that you're not going to run into a problem. If FDA officer for some reason decided to question it, then you would want to have some sort of documentation to prove it. But I will tell you, in 15 years, I've never seen FDA question a gluten-free claim on a product that clearly didn't have any ingredient that would be considered a source of gluten. Okay. Next question, where can I have access to all of the authorized additives, GRAS, and color additives? So on that slide, you'll see I've listed the GRAS notice inventory as well as the Code of Federal Regulations. Those are accessible through the FDA's webpage, so you can use that. Or if you just search for the electronic Code of Federal Regulations, then you can find it that way too. So everything is online, which makes life a lot easier. Okay, let's see. Okay, so in Canada, there are some common names that are accepted, such as cocoa versus cacao, and similar flexibility in common names according to the FDA permitted. So yes, common names would be those that are generally accepted in the marketplace. And so usually it's a matter of whether or not American consumers are going to recognize it and attribute to it the basic nature of the product. This is why these standards of identity exist, though. So, the history of food labeling over the last 100 years, certain companies that maybe were not doing things the right way might call a product by a specific name, even though it did not have the basic characteristics that a consumer would expect. And so FDA established these standards so that they could take action against a company that was doing it the wrong way. So for example, there's a standard for flour because, 100 years ago, they used to adulterate flour by adding sawdust to make it more cheaply. So there's a standard for flour. There's a standard for peanut butter. There's standards for jams. So for example, if you look on a US retail shelf, you might see certain products that are called jams that conform to that standard, and then others that are called fruit spreads. So if you have a product that does not conform to jam, you can still sell it, you just can't use that name. And so that's why it's so important to make sure that you check the standards to see if your product is subject to one. Chocolate also relies on standards of identity for cacao nibs and chocolate liqueur and what milk chocolate is deemed. So if you have a chocolate product, there are a lot of regulations and policies that FDA has to ensure that unless it's real chocolate, it's not being called by that name. And so you'll have to come up with a different name if it turns out that your product does not conform to those standards related to chocolate. Okay. Another next question is if you're adding infusions in a product, what is the requirement? So I'm not entirely sure what you mean by infusion, but I'm guessing that you may mean flavor, like natural or artificial flavor or ingredients. And so those have definitions in FDA's regulations. If they're being added, often you can just call it a natural flavor or an artificial flavor. It is important, though, to know that it may impact the name of your product. So, for example, if you're making a product that you're calling strawberry shortcake, but it does not have strawberries, it only has a strawberry flavoring essence, then you can't call it strawberry shortcake. You have to call it strawberry flavored shortcake. Okay, can you expand on what the U.S. Agent Service provides? Yes. So for any new shippers to the U.S. or people who are contemplating shipping, know that if you are not within the United States, when you register your company to be able to ship food to the U.S., you must have a U.S. agent that is someone physically within the United States. And it has to be, an actual person here. It can't just be an office or a PO box. This person is in charge of being your communication link to FDA in the event that they want to inspect or anything related to your actual registration. And so Registrar Corp has a service for this. We actually represent about 18,000 companies, I think, at last count, as a U.S. agent. And it's a very important role and one that we take very seriously because if FDA is going to inspect your facility, you need to know that right away. If you're relying on your uncle that happens to live in Los Angeles or somebody who's not really reliable, or if you're relying on your importer or a distributor, sometimes that won't work out well if they can't be relied to get you that information right away. We pride ourselves on being very responsive and making sure that you're informed and also communicating with FDA on your behalf. Again, we have 20 years of doing this. It's our reason for living, and so our U.S. agent service is designed to help you in this respect. We also have some other added benefits that come with that. You receive a number of free prior notice submissions. We're on call. If you have, for example, a detention, you can send us your notice of action. We'll look it over. We'll explain what's happening. We'll explain how you might be able to resolve it. And we're there to be your partner for exporting to the U.S. Okay, let's see. Next question. Where can I find information about accepted intervals when it comes to nutritional values, such as a plus minus on the fat gram amount? So FDA does have a pretty generous tolerance, I would say, when it comes to your nutrition facts, the values in your nutrition facts chart. So it's approximately about 20% or so, depending on the nutrient. And that would be either 20% above or 20% below, depending on the nutrient. So that is all found in 21 CFR 101.9. It's, I think, in Part G of that regulation, and that's where they describe what sort of variance you can have. Because FDA does understand that there are going to be variances due to, seasonal or climate conditions, manufacturing practices, variations that are unavoidable just by the nature of food manufacturing. So they've got a pretty good tolerance that they will allow. Let's see. Okay, so for nutrient content claims, such as rich in vitamin C, can USDA food data central nutritional data be used, or do you have to have it analyzed? So, excellent question, and it also gives me the opportunity to let you know that the information in your nutrition chart does not have to be based on actual nutritional analysis lab testing. That's, of course, the safest way to make sure that your nutrient values are accurate, but it's also really expensive and time consuming. So FDA does allow you to use nutrient databases such as USDA's in order to develop your nutrition facts panel. Now, for example, there are services online. We have one that's called AllaCalc that actually harnesses that information for you and generates nutrition facts panels for you. So you're absolutely allowed to use that. When it comes to nutrient content claims, you can rely upon that. However, FDA, depending on the inspector or whoever is reviewing it, should they do that, could expect that you have tested it in order to ensure that it's accurate. And that's because if you're using a nutrient content claim, if you're using USDA data, you want to make sure it applies to your product, because in essence, if you're marketing your product to say it is a good source of vitamin C, it has to have at least 10% of the daily value. If yours comes in under that, then that's misbranding. The consumer is buying it because you are claiming it's a good source, and then they're not getting a good source of vitamin C from your product. So it's more tricky when you have nutrient content claims. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Okay, let's see. Next one is manufacturing or expiration date information mandatory on the label. It is not actually mandatory according to the FDA's rules for general food labeling. However, many, I would say maybe most companies find that this is very important information to be on the label. Usually it's sort of pre-printed, ink jetted on during the manufacturing process. It's important for other issues, so like food safety issues, traceability issues. If there's a problem with the product and there needs to be a recall, you're going to need, for example, a lot number to go by. So, and also for consumers, you don't want a consumer to be consuming a product that's expired, not just for safety issues, but if there's a quality issue, because then they're going to think that all your products taste like that, and that's not good either from a marketing standpoint. So even though not a mandatory part of the labeling regulations, you'll probably want to put that on there. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Are fresh products like bluefin tuna risky and might be detained if the labeling doesn't match the FDA regulations? So fresh seafood has a high rate of inspection, not just for labeling, but for other issues such as decomposition, histamines, microbiological contamination. So if you're shipping, especially bulk, fresh or frozen tuna or other seafood, you're going to make sure that you've checked off all your boxes, not just labeling, but also on the food safety side. Okay, let's see. Okay, for products such as jams and marmalades, would we need to specify country of origin for manufacturing or country of origin for the fruit used? Generally speaking, your country of origin, according to customs, because it's the place where the product was last substantially transformed, will be wherever you actually manufactured it. So if your fruit is coming from a different country, or particularly a number of different countries, generally speaking, those won't be declared. Some people will do it voluntarily. So they might say, product of France, fruit or dates from Tunisia or something like that. But usually the country of origin is the place of the last substantial transformation. Okay. Next question is about placement of a barcode or a QR code. FDA doesn't have any placement requirements, so you can pretty much put it wherever you like. You just want to make sure that it does not impede the mandatory information that's on your information panel. Okay, let's see. If our product, which is sugar, should we show 8 requirements nutritional on the label in English according to the FDA regulations? So even for a single ingredient product like sugar or maple syrup or olive oil, those sorts of products, even if they're single ingredient, you are still required to have all of the mandatory labeling elements present. So sugar, for example, would have a nutrition chart because it has calories, carbohydrates, and sugars and added sugars in the product. It will have a nutrition chart, and it will need to have the other mandatory elements. Single ingredient products can be exempted from the ingredients list, since that's all they are, but we still recommend that it be included because an FDA inspector could stop the product, maybe not believe you that that's the only thing, require you to test the product, wonder if there's an anti-caking agent or something like that added. And even if you're proven correct, it's still taken a month or two for this all to resolve itself. And FDA, as I mentioned, they have high workloads, so they don't always move very quickly. So we recommend the ingredients list as well in that case. Okay. See, we're a manufacturer in the United Kingdom. Can we use UK instead of the full name? Off the top of my head, I believe that you can, but you would want to go to the U.S. Customs webpage. They have what are called customs rulings, and those are statements, they're policy guides basically, or policy statements from customs, and they have stated which abbreviations are considered understandable by a U.S. consumer. I do believe UK is one of those, but you'll want to double check to make sure. Okay, let's see. Again, some other questions about business-to-business products. Again, those tend to be exempted from nutrition facts labeling, but should have the rest of the mandatory statements. Same with samples. If you're sending samples to the U.S., then you're going to want to have all of the mandatory information except for nutrition labeling, and you will want to put a statement such as sample only, not for sale, that sort of thing. So even if you're just sending it to a trade show, it's best to have all of that labeling present except for the nutrition chart. Okay. Next question, where can I access the full FDA rules? FDA has things spread all over the place. I don't mind telling you. When we do our label reviews, we usually estimate 15 to 20 business days because there's so many different places that we have to check. So there's the Code of Federal Regulations that we've referenced today. They also have hundreds of guidance documents about all sorts of compliance issues, from ingredients to nutrition charts to, what can be deemed gluten-free. It's just a lot of information. Most of it is on the website. You just kind of have to know where to look. Okay, next question. What can you tell us about Prop 65 and PFAS regulations? So as far as Prop 65 goes, that is specific to the state of California, and it covers not just consumer products, but I believe, environments and anything in the state of California is probably subject to Prop 65. Prop 65 is difficult because it's not just about the ingredient in your product. It's about whether anything on their list is present, whether you intended it to be there or not. So for example, coffee has a warning label for Prop 65 in California because when you roast coffee, acrylamide forms, and that is on their list. So it's not an ingredient, it's not anything maybe you know about, but it has to have that warning because of that. Another example is chocolate sometimes will have warnings for Prop 65 in California because of lead and cadmium. Due to the environmental conditions where cacao beans are grown, sometimes lead and cadmium end up in the bean and then end up in the chocolate. So you may have no idea that there is that contaminant in your product, but if you're marketing in California, you need to know that because of the Prop 65 rules. For PFAS, that's also kind of a lot of the states are coming up with regulations regarding the PFAS, the forever chemicals. Right now, FDA doesn't have anything in place. So at the federal level, there are no restrictions at this point in time. Okay, next question, is edible gold free to enter the US? Strictly speaking, no. If it's being used as a color additive, which generally speaking, it probably is because of that's what it's doing. It's imparting color. It doesn't serve a nutrient or a technical function. Strictly speaking, it would be considered an unapproved color additive. But we've seen, people and products being marketed with it. So there's a very popular cinnamon schnapps here called Goldschlager that has gold flakes. But strictly speaking, it is not approved as a color additive. So I would avoid sending any products that have edible gold into the US. You may need to find an alternative, involving titanium dioxide or yellow number 5, that can mimic that same color while still being approved color additives in the US. Okay, we're going over, and I hope that's okay with everyone. I do want to try and answer a few more questions before we sign off. If we don't get to all of them, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, either me, A. Benevente at registrarcorp.com or info@registrar.com. Also, that link on my previous slide is where you can send your labels for a free label assessment. It's usually conducted by me or an experienced person on my team. And so we'll give you a general overview of whether or not we think there are any problems with the labels that are found in your product. Let's see. Okay, let me find the last few questions here. See, where can we access FDA's regulations on microbiological parameters and nutritional information? The microbiological parameters, the regulations themselves are very general because it has to cover every single type of food product. There are some resources if you look that up on FDA's webpage. Again, a lot of them are not actually published. FDA gives themselves a lot of latitude in determining whether or not a product is adulterated. But if you look up defect action level, you will find some that are specified. However, again, FDA gives themselves a lot of latitude. Yesterday, the head of our food safety group and I were looking at a situation where FDA detained a product that had levels below the defect action level. So again, the best thing that you can do is just do your best to make sure that adulteration is kept in check or within the parameters of what are considered good manufacturing practices. The nutritional information regulations are in our Code of Federal Regulations. Title 21 is the section where FDA has all of their regulations. And so that's generally where you'll find it. And there are hundreds of guidance documents on their webpage. And they address a lot of other types of issues, like whether or not you can call honey or maple syrup, or guidance to help industry understand the regulations. So those are all basically posted to the FDA webpage. Okay. All right, so next question. If you are inkjetting the country of origin on the case, do you still need to print it on each individual package inside the case? So the question really depends on whether the packages inside the case are going to be sold separately. The customs regulation is written where the ultimate purchaser needs to know what the country of origin is. So if the case is being sent to, say, a restaurant or a food cafeteria, and they're just going to open it up and use the packages inside, you would only need to have it on the case. If the packages inside will be distributed separately, and each of those goes to an ultimate purchaser, the inner packages then do need to have the country of origin statement. Okay, let's see. Okay, next question, is the co-packer also a substantial transformation, the last in the process? It will depend on exactly what is transpiring during that packing process. So for example, if you have a product, I'm going to use a cosmetic example, but the same applies. So sometimes companies will manufacture the actual cosmetic in another country, say Malaysia or China or India or Russia or something like that. Then they'll send it to Italy, where it is put into containers and a super fancy label attached, and they'll add product of Italy. That is misbranding. That's because the product itself has not changed since it was transferred over to Italy. So if all you're doing is filling a container, then the country of origin stays from where the product was actually manufactured. Okay, the next question, are there any restrictions on using ingredients from China or other countries, although the FDA approves it? So generally speaking, for FDA regulated ingredients, the source of the ingredient doesn't necessarily have any limitations as long as it meets any specifications that are in regulation. So for example, xanthan gum has specifications in the food additive approval that have to be met. So if your supplier is meeting those specifications, generally speaking, the origin of that ingredient may not matter. This is different though for animal sourced ingredients. So for example, if it's a milk or egg or chicken or beef ingredient being used in an FDA regulated product, there may be some limitations on that. Okay, let's see. Try and get in a couple more. Let's see. Okay, there's a question about, do you need to have your weight in pounds, or is it fine if it's only in grams? You will need to have the ounces, pounds, fluid ounce, the imperial, avoirdupois measurement, in addition to metric. Okay, let's see. There's a question about the tolerance on the net weights. Very good question. So yes, the CFR just states that it has to be accurate, which is not very helpful. If you go to the FDA's webpage and you search, you can find what's called a CPG, a compliance policy guide, and that gives you a little bit of a range. They describe how an inspector, if they are testing for net weight, what they will be looking for. I want to say it's about 2.5%, but don't quote me on that. But there is a compliance policy guide, and if you're curious, please do follow up and send me your email, send us your email, and I can get you that exact number. Okay. Next question, how can I make a sugar-free claim on products? What are the legislative references to follow? So sugar-free claim, excellent example of a nutrient content claim. And so those are all written into regulation, Title 21 of the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. And in there, I believe it's 0.60. But there's a whole section on calorie and sugar claims, and when you can make those claims, what level of sugar, it has to be below. I believe it's 0.5 grams per serving, and also any other disclosures that might need to take place. So for example, if it's sugar-free, but it has, 40 grams of fat per serving, you may have to disclose that. So it's important to know if there are any additional disclosure requirements when you're making a nutrient content claim. So for example, A cholesterol-free claim on vegetable oil, because there's a lot of fat, still requires disclosure of the total fat amount. Okay. And so, okay, I'll try and get one more in, as it's now, we're about 15 minutes past. Let me get one more in. Let's see, does fresh seafood have any special labeling restrictions or requirements? So this will depend on whether or not it's being sold in a package, whether it's being sold at the seafood counter, what package it's in when it crosses the port. So when it crosses the port, if it's bulk and being sold to a grocery store, then the basic information that we've talked about today, plus there may be some additional requirements, like whether it's wild caught, and the method used, or is it farm raised. Once it arrives at the grocery store, if it's being just put out in the seafood counter, then usually it's just the country of origin, and then the grocery stores themselves are subject to making certain information available. If it's going to be packaged, though, so if it's going to be fresh, but in an actual, 2-pound package, say fresh shrimp in a 2-pound package, then it's going to be subject to all of the labeling regulations that we've described today. Okay. And so with that, I want to thank everybody for attending today. We've come to the end of our time, but if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We really do look forward to partnering with you as you expand into the U.S. market. And again, hope that you found today's presentation helpful. Have a great day.